On a bright Mediterranean morning in late October 1995, a man stepped out of his hotel in Malta, just another tourist enjoying the sun. He never saw the two motorcyclists approaching from behind. Within seconds, a series of shots rang out and he lay dead on the pavement. His killers vanished into the maze of narrow streets before anyone could react. This was no random act of violence. The victim was Fathi Shaqaqi, founder of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement, traveling on a forged passport. The location was not a war zone but peaceful, neutral Malta. Yet the operation bore the unmistakable, surgically precise signature of Mossad, a mission that still sends a chill through intelligence circles today. Malta was never meant to be a battlefield. This tiny island nation in the Mediterranean, famed for its ancient fortifications, crystal waters, and status as a tranquil tourist retreat, seemed worlds away from Middle Eastern strife. Yet on that autumn day in 1995, it became the stage for one of Mossad's most audacious operations, turning a quiet street in Sliema into an execution site that would shock the world and reignite debates about sovereignty, terrorism, and the ethics of targeted killings. The man lying dead on the Maltese pavement was no ordinary militant. Fathi Shaqaqi represented something far more dangerous to Israeli security strategists, an intelligent, highly educated leader with international connections who had successfully fused Palestinian nationalism with radical Islamist ideology. He transformed Palestinian Islamic Jihad from a marginal faction into a significant force capable of undermining the fragile peace process Israel and moderate Palestinians were trying to build. That made him not just an enemy, but an existential threat Israel decided it could no longer tolerate. To understand why Shaqaqi had to die, one must grasp who he was, what he symbolized, and how his unique blend of qualities made him so perilous. This was not a man who took up arms in a fit of rage or acted on impulse. He was a pediatrician with degrees in physics and mathematics, someone who could have lived a comfortable life treating children in Gaza. Instead, he chose the path of architect for some of the most devastating terrorist attacks Israel had ever experienced. This transformation from healer to revolutionary speaks volumes about the nature of ideological commitment and the complexity of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Born in 1951 in the Rafah refugee camp in Gaza, Shaqaqi grew up in an atmosphere of displacement and humiliation that defined Palestinian existence after 1948. His family had been expelled from their native village of Zarnuka during Israel's creation, joining hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who lost their homes and became refugees on their own land. For Shaqaqi, this was not abstract political theory. It was lived experience, the foundation of a worldview that ultimately led him to conclude armed resistance was not merely justified but obligatory. What set Shaqaqi apart from other Palestinian militants was his intellectual sophistication and ability to articulate a vision merging two powerful ideological currents. Palestinian nationalism had traditionally been secular, embodied by Yasser Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization with its roots in anti-colonial liberation movements. But Shaqaqi witnessed the 1979 Iranian Revolution, watching as Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah and established an Islamic republic challenging both Western powers and secular Arab regimes. For Shaqaqi, this became a model, revolutionary Islam as both ideology and practical political force. He wrote a book titled Khomeini, The Islamic Solution and the Alternative, outlining his vision so clearly that Egyptian authorities immediately banned it. The book argued that liberating Palestine was possible not through secular nationalism or diplomatic negotiations, but only through armed Islamic resistance modeled on the Iranian revolutionary example. This synthesis of Palestinian nationalism with Shia revolutionary ideology was explosive in every sense, providing a theological justification for violence, while retaining the nationalist core that resonated with Palestinians regardless of their religiosity. In 1981, Shaqaqi and Abd al-Aziz Auda founded the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The timing was deliberate. Arafat's PLO was beginning to hint at possible recognition of Israel and diplomatic solutions. For hardliners like Shaqaqi, this was unacceptable betrayal. They created their organization specifically to reject any reconciliation with Israel, to pursue armed resistance as the only legitimate strategy, and to do so under an openly Islamic banner rather than the secular nationalism that had dominated Palestinian politics for decades. The group remained small compared to the PLO or the rising Hamas, but its influence was disproportionate. Islamic Jihad specialized in suicide bombings and attacks on Israeli civilians, operations designed to maximize psychological impact and undermine any peace process. Each blast sent a signal that no matter what diplomatic agreements politicians might sign, armed resistance would continue. This veto power over peace made the organization strategically significant far beyond its actual numbers. Shaqaqi's personal profile added another dimension to the threat. He did not hide in caves or live as a fugitive in the wilderness. He maintained connections across the Arab world and beyond, traveling regularly to meet with Iranian officials who provided funding and weapons. He coordinated with Hezbollah in Lebanon for training and operational support. He gave interviews to international journalists, articulating his organization's position in fluent English with the polish of an educated professional. This combination of operational capability and public relations skill made him uniquely dangerous, as he could both order attacks and justify them to an audience that might otherwise be skeptical. Israeli authorities arrested Shaqaqi twice in the 1980s, imprisoning him for his activities. But incarceration only bolstered his credibility among Palestinians. He emerged as a hero of the resistance, a man willing to suffer for the cause. In 1988, Israel deported him to Lebanon, essentially washing its hands and making him someone else's problem. This proved a catastrophic miscalculation, as Lebanon gave Shaqaqi exactly what he needed: direct access to Hezbollah and, through it, to Iranian support networks that transformed Islamic Jihad from a nuisance into a serious threat. By the early 1990s, Shaqaqi was based in Damascus under the protection of Syrian President Hafez al-Assad. Syria maintained a policy of hosting leaders of Palestinian factions as part of its broader strategy of using Palestinian groups as leverage against Israel without engaging in direct, open conflict. Damascus provided sanctuary, allowing Shaqaqi to coordinate operations, receive funding, and travel to other countries like Libya for meetings with Muammar Gaddafi to secure additional financial backing. He was building an international network that gave his organization resources and reach far exceeding what its size would suggest. The strategic context of the early 1990s explains why Israel decided Shaqaqi had to be removed. In 1993, the Oslo Accords brought Israelis and Palestinians to the negotiating table for the first time. Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin shook hands at the White House, with President Bill Clinton beaming between them, promising a framework for peace and Palestinian autonomy. For many around the world, this symbolized hope that decades of conflict might finally end, but not everyone celebrated. Hamas and Islamic Jihad wholly rejected the accords, viewing them as betrayal and capitulation. For these rejectionist groups, any recognition of Israel was unacceptable, any territorial compromise a defeat. They responded with violence designed to derail the peace process, making Israelis question whether Palestinians could be partners for peace at all. Suicide bombings shook buses and cafes, targeting civilians with attacks calibrated to maximize horror and political resonance. Each explosion strengthened the hand of Israeli hardliners who argued that granting Palestinians autonomy would only increase the security threat. Shaqaqi personally ordered and coordinated several such attacks. Under his leadership, Islamic Jihad carried out operations that killed dozens of Israeli civilians. These were not military targets or infrastructure. They were deliberate attacks on civilian populations designed to sow fear and undermine political will for peace. From Israel's perspective, each bombing was not merely a security failure but a political disaster, making peace increasingly difficult. And the man orchestrating this campaign lived safely in Damascus, traveled the world, and enjoyed growing support from Iran. Israeli intelligence began tracking Shaqaqi with the intent to eliminate him. This was not a sudden decision, but a calculated conclusion based on threat assessment. Shaqaqi embodied three dangerous elements at once: operational capability to order attacks, ideological influence inspiring others, and international connections providing resources. Removing him would not destroy the organization entirely, but would seriously disrupt its operations, and send a signal to other militant leaders about the consequences of targeting Israeli citizens. The challenge lay in finding a suitable opportunity. Shaqaqi was not careless. He traveled using false documents, changed routes, and stayed in areas where he enjoyed the protection of host governments. Striking him in Damascus was virtually impossible given Syrian security and diplomatic repercussions. Libya was an equally difficult target. Mossad needed a place where Shaqaqi would be vulnerable, where an operational team could act without immediate detection, and where exit routes would allow evacuation before local authorities could effectively respond. Such an opportunity materialized when Israeli intelligence learned Shaqaqi planned a flight from Libya back to Syria with a layover in Malta. The intelligence likely came from multiple sources: electronic intercepts of his communications, informants within Palestinian circles, and possibly even cooperation from intelligence services of countries sharing Israel's interest in combating terrorism. The exact sources remain classified, but the result was actionable intelligence giving Mossad the necessary window. Malta offered nearly ideal operational conditions. The island nation was small, with a population under 400,000, allowing foreign operatives to blend easily among the constant flow of tourists. Its geographic position in the Mediterranean made it a natural transit point for travelers between North Africa and the Middle East. Its security services were competent but not expecting sophisticated foreign intelligence operations. And critically, Malta's size meant that after completing the operation, evacuation by sea or air could be executed quickly before an effective pursuit could be organized. The diplomatic risk was substantial. Malta was a neutral country not involved in Middle Eastern conflicts. Carrying out an assassination on Maltese territory would be a blatant violation of sovereignty, capable of causing serious diplomatic fallout. But Israel had conducted such operations in Europe before, calculating that diplomatic complications, while unpleasant, would be manageable. The elimination of the target would be permanent, while diplomatic complaints would fade over time. The operation was overseen by the Caesarea unit within Mossad. This elite department specializes in the most sensitive missions abroad, particularly assassinations and abductions on hostile or neutral territory. Caesarea operatives undergo years of training in surveillance, weapons handling, extraction and evasion methods, and the psychological conditioning required to execute lethal missions with professional detachment. They operate in small cells with minimal communication to reduce compromise risk, and are selected for their ability to blend into civilian environments without attracting attention. The operational team likely consisted of 6 to 8 agents with specific roles. Surveillance specialists tracked Shaqaqi from the moment he arrived in Malta, logging his movements and identifying patterns. The actual hit team, likely 2 operatives on a motorcycle, was to carry out the sentence. Support personnel handled logistics, arranged escape routes, maintained communications, and ensured the team could evacuate successfully. This compartmentalization meant that if one individual were compromised, they could not give away the entire operation. Preparation required meticulous attention to detail. The team needed weapons that could be smuggled into Malta or acquired locally without detection. A motorcycle had to be obtained either through rental using false documents or by theft. Safe houses served as staging areas for final preparations. Communication equipment allowed coordination between team members and handlers running the operation from a remote location, perhaps a vessel in neutral waters or a command post in Israel itself. The operation's timeframe was tight. Shaqaqi was not staying in Malta for long, merely transiting on his way to Damascus. This meant the team had limited windows to strike. They could not afford to wait days for perfect conditions. They had to act during Shaqaqi's brief stay while ensuring enough time for evacuation before Maltese authorities could mount an effective response. The pressure of this compressed schedule added risk, but also reduced the likelihood the operation would be discovered before execution. Shaqaqi walked through Sliema on the afternoon of October 26, completely unaware he was under constant observation. For him, Malta represented neutral territory, far from the long arm of Israel that had nearly killed him in previous attempts. He relaxed his usual security measures, moving almost like a tourist rather than a man with a death sentence. This false sense of security was precisely what Mossad counted on. The operation's success depended on Shaqaqi believing he was safe where he was, in fact, utterly exposed. The execution itself demonstrated professional precision. As Shaqaqi walked down the street, two motorcyclists approached from behind at normal speed, not racing or drawing attention. From close range, they opened fire, several shots to the head to ensure instant death. Some reports mention a silencer on the weapon, explaining why bystanders did not immediately react to the gunshots. Others suggest the motorcycle engine noise muffled the pops. Either way, Shaqaqi collapsed onto the pavement with fatal wounds before he could comprehend what was happening. The assassins did not panic or flee in obvious haste. They accelerated but maintained control, maneuvering through the streets of Sliema to an extraction point. This controlled withdrawal reduced the chance of accidents that could delay them or draw police attention. Within minutes, they reached their vehicle or boat and were leaving Maltese territory. The entire operation, from the first shot to final evacuation, likely lasted less than 15 minutes, a testament to the planning and training that preceded the actual hit. Shaqaqi's body lay on the street for several minutes before emergency services arrived. By the time Maltese authorities understood what had happened and began an investigation, the operational team was already beyond their reach. Some reports suggest evacuation by boat to neutral waters where an Israeli vessel waited. Others indicate the team left the island via the airport using forged passports on separate flights to avoid detection. The exact method remains classified, but the result was clear. No arrests, no immediate leads, only questions about who had conducted such a brazen operation on Maltese soil. The immediate aftermath provoked a furious response from various quarters. Palestinian Islamic Jihad publicly mourned Shaqaqi, holding massive funeral ceremonies and immediately elevating him to martyr status. His portrait appeared on posters throughout Gaza and the West Bank. Sermons in mosques praised his sacrifice and called for continued resistance. For the organization, the killing provided powerful propaganda material. Their leader had been killed by the Zionist enemy, proving the righteousness of their cause and the necessity of continuing armed struggle. The martyrdom narrative aided recruitment and fundraising, turning Shaqaqi's death into fuel for the very organization Israel hoped to decapitate. Maltese authorities found themselves in an extremely difficult position. A political assassination had occurred on their territory, violating their sovereignty and exposing an inability to prevent sophisticated foreign operations. They launched an investigation but quickly encountered difficulties tracking professional intelligence officers who had planned their exit as meticulously as their attack. Forensic evidence was minimal. Witnesses provided only vague descriptions. The motorcycle was likely stolen or dumped. The weapons were never found. Every lead went cold, indicating perpetrators skilled in evading investigation. The diplomatic fallout was significant. Malta issued a formal protest to Israel and demanded explanations, but Israel adhered to its standard policy of neither confirming nor denying responsibility for alleged intelligence operations. Official Israeli representatives offered alternative explanations. Perhaps internal Palestinian feuding, perhaps other militant groups, any scenario unrelated to Israeli intelligence. This plausible deniability protected Israel from formal accountability. While everyone involved understood the truth, France and other European countries expressed concern over the sovereignty violation, fearing that tolerating such operations without consequences would normalize using European soil for extrajudicial killings. The precedent was dangerous. If Israel could kill someone in Malta with impunity, what would stop other nations from doing the same? Russia eliminating a dissident in London, China pursuing activists in Taiwan, Iran killing opponents in Paris. The list of potential scenarios was endless and alarming, suggesting a world where sovereign territory meant nothing if powerful nations decided someone should die. Israel's calculation was that diplomatic complaints, while unpleasant, were tolerable compared to the security threat Shaqaqi posed. Relations with Malta might cool temporarily, but Malta had no leverage to compel an Israeli response. European criticism would be loud but ultimately ineffective without concrete evidence and political will to pursue consequences. And the operation's success would reinforce Israel's deterrent signal to other militant leaders. Nowhere is truly safe, no protection absolute, and the long arm of Israeli intelligence reaches globally, regardless of diplomatic niceties. Whether the operation achieved its strategic goals remains debatable. In immediate tactical terms, the answer is unequivocally yes. Shaqaqi was eliminated. The organization experienced leadership disruption and operational confusion. The group spent weeks reorganizing instead of planning attacks. Israel gained a respite during a critical period when the peace process needed stability. The assassination demonstrated Israeli capability and resolve, potentially deterring other militants from following Shaqaqi's path. But the long-term strategic assessment is far more ambiguous. Islamic Jihad appointed Ramadan Shalla as Shaqaqi's successor within weeks. Shalla, an academic with a doctorate in economics who had taught in the United States, proved a surprisingly capable militant leader. He rebuilt the structure, maintained relations with Iranian sponsors, and resumed operations. Within months, the group was conducting attacks again. Within years, it had re-established itself as a significant militant force. The disruption was temporary, not permanent. More problematically, Shaqaqi's martyrdom became a powerful recruitment and propaganda tool. His face appeared on flags and posters. His story inspired young Palestinians to join militant ranks. His death was cited as proof that Israel would never accept Palestinians and that armed resistance remained the only viable strategy. In the perverse mathematics of asymmetric conflict, killing a leader sometimes strengthens an organization by providing a martyr who inspires greater commitment than a living leader ever could. The operation also had unintended consequences for the peace process. It was partly intended to protect it, but by demonstrating Israel's willingness to carry out killings in neutral countries, it reinforced Palestinian narratives of Israeli aggression and disregard for international law. It gave ammunition to those who argued Israel was not sincerely committed to peace, but only to military solutions. And it made some moderate Palestinians more cautious about visible cooperation with Israel or Western countries, fearing they could become targets for radical groups viewing such cooperation as collaboration. 3 decades later, Palestinian Islamic Jihad continues to exist as a significant militant organization. It maintains close ties with Iran, receives substantial funding and weapons, runs training camps, and conducts regular attacks against Israeli targets. The organization Shaqaqi founded outlived his death, adapted to changing circumstances, and remains a strategic security threat to Israel. In purely organizational terms, his elimination did not achieve the lasting destruction Israeli planners might have hoped for. And yet, from Israel's perspective, the operation was still justified and necessary. Every year Shaqaqi lived, he coordinated attacks that killed civilians. His removal meant those specific attacks he would have planned never happened. The lives saved, though impossible to count precisely, represented real people who did not die because Shaqaqi was not alive to order their deaths. This calculus of preemptive action lies at the heart of all Israeli targeted killing policy. Better to eliminate threats before they materialize than to respond after attacks have already occurred. The ethical questions raised by the Malta operation remain unresolved and likely unresolvable. Was it legitimate self-defense against an active combatant responsible for civilian deaths? Or was it an extrajudicial killing, violating fundamental legal principles of due process and sovereignty? The answer depends entirely on your starting assumptions about the nature of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the legitimacy of armed resistance versus terrorism, and the acceptable boundaries of state action against non-state actors. Those who view Palestinian militant groups as terrorists engaged in criminal activity see the killing as a problematic, yet understandable pragmatic response to threats conventional legal systems could not handle. Those who see these same groups as resistance fighters against occupation consider the killing a state crime, with Israel using its military superiority to eliminate political opponents without trial or accountability. Both viewpoints contain internal logical consistency. They simply proceed from incompatible premises about the conflict's fundamental nature. Malta itself never received satisfactory answers about what happened on its soil. The investigation officially remains open, but has led to no arrests or charges. Israel never formally acknowledged responsibility, maintaining the official ambiguity that characterizes all sensitive intelligence operations. Former Mossad officers have written books describing the operation in detail. but these accounts are technically unofficial and do not constitute legal evidence that could support prosecution. The truth exists in that strange space where everyone knows but no one can prove, where operational success insulates the perpetrators from consequences, while the victims' supporters nurse grievances that fuel future conflicts. The legacy of October 26, 1995, extends far beyond the specific case of Fathi Shaqaqi. The operation demonstrated that modern intelligence services can conduct complex operations almost anywhere in the world if properly motivated and resourced. It showed that small neutral countries cannot necessarily protect people on their soil from a foreign intelligence operation. It exposed the limitation of international law and diplomatic protests when dealing with states determined to pursue security objectives regardless of legal niceties. And perhaps most significantly, it illustrated the fundamental problem with decapitation strategy against ideological movements. You can kill a leader, but if the ideology remains attractive and the conditions producing leaders persist, new ones will emerge. Shaqaqi's death did not end Palestinian Islamic Jihad or discredit its message. It merely created a vacancy someone else filled to continue the fight. This reality confronts not only Israel but any nation attempting to combat terrorism through targeted killings. The tactic can disrupt plans, delay, and deter, but it rarely destroys the movement itself. For Palestinians, Shaqaqi remains a controversial figure even within their own community. Some remember him as a visionary who realized armed resistance was necessary for liberation. Others see him as an extremist whose tactics undermined Palestinian interests, giving Israel justification for military action and derailing diplomatic efforts that might have brought progress through negotiation. These internal debates reflect broader tensions within Palestinian society over strategy, tactics, and the price of perpetual conflict. For Israelis, the operation embodies both success and frustration. Success because it eliminated a dangerous enemy and demonstrated operational capability. Frustration because despite tactical victories, the strategic situation remains essentially unchanged. Islamic Jihad continues to attack, Iranian support continues to flow, and the cycle of violence perpetuates itself. Each tactical success buys temporary security without resolving the underlying conflict that generates an endless supply of enemies willing to continue the fight. The world has largely forgotten the details of what happened in Malta that autumn day. Other conflicts have captured attention. New crises demand focus. The specific case of Fathi Shaqaqi has faded from headlines, even as the principles it embodied about sovereignty, terrorism, and the ethics of preemptive action remain acutely relevant. Subsequent operations in Dubai, Damascus, Tehran, and elsewhere have followed similar patterns, suggesting the Malta precedent established templates intelligence services continue to apply. What remains 3 decades later is a story without resolution, a case without closure, and questions without satisfactory answers. Fathi Shaqaqi died on a Maltese street, killed by professionals who vanished without a trace. His organization survived, his ideology persists, his martyrdom inspires, and the conflict that spawned him continues to generate new leaders willing to follow the same path. Ensuring intelligence services will continue making the same calculations about when targeted killings serve strategic interest. A pediatrician turned revolutionary, an intellectual who ordered suicide bombings, a martyr who still inspires violence from the grave. All these contradictions embodied in one man lying dead on a Mediterranean pavement. Malta was merely geography. The real battlefield has always been the competing narratives about justice, resistance, and the acceptable price of pursuing political goals through violence. That battlefield remains contested. The war continues, and the ghost of Shaqaqi still walks among the ruins. Where do you stand on the case of Fathi Shaqaqi? Was his elimination justified self-defense or a violation of international law that set dangerous precedents? Does eliminating militant leaders strengthen security or simply create martyrs inspiring the next generation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this deep dive into intelligence operations helped you see the complexity behind the headlines, please like and share this video. Subscribe to the channel for more explorations that pull back the curtain on official versions to show you how power truly operates in the shadows. Hit the notification bell. The next buried operation awaits uncovering.